Under German law, the age of criminal responsibility is set at 14. The general belief is that children younger than this are simply not capable of forming criminal intent. It's presumed that, due to their youth, they can't cause truly severe harm to one another. Furthermore, from a psychological standpoint, it's generally accepted that individuals so young lack the capacity to genuinely wish death upon someone. However, the story I'm about to share with you today thoroughly challenges this established viewpoint. Let me walk you through events that transpired very recently in 2023. This horrifying incident completely upended the German law enforcement agency's understanding of the shortcomings within their own criminal justice system. It's quite possible this case has become one of the most talked about and disturbing criminal events in Europe for that year. What was most profoundly shocking wasn't merely the brutality of the act itself, but the astonishingly young age of those involved. Moreover, the apparent motive was so trivial that leading psychiatrists hesitated to even speculate on what kind of future these children might face. In any event, due to the protections afforded by the country's criminal law, some of the individuals central to this narrative will remain unnamed, and their images undisclosed in this account. Louise was a young girl living in Freudenberg, Germany. She had just celebrated her 12th birthday in 2023. The girl attended the local school, where she achieved good academic results. She was a quiet and notably shy child, perhaps excessively so. Her meek disposition eventually led other children to perceive it as a weakness. Louise consistently avoided confrontation, and as a result, a few peers began to target her with ridicule at school. Initially, she simply tried to ignore their jibes, but this behavior progressively escalated into full-blown bullying. Despite her tender age, Louise experienced the full brunt of others' malice. For no apparent reason, several other girls began to torment her relentlessly, showing no signs of letting up. Yet, the young heroine of our story was determined to handle this problem on her own. Louise kept the escalating situation from her parents and refrained from complaining to her teachers. Nevertheless, two girls, aged 12 and 13, would regularly wait for her after school, accompanying her home with a barrage of taunting remarks. They deliberately timed their actions to avoid adult supervision. The malicious teasing continued during school hours. They would find opportunities during recess, ridiculing Louise in every conceivable way in front of her classmates. All of this occurred when teachers were unaware of what was truly happening. In reality, Louise and these girls had once been close friends for a significant period. Following the breakdown of their friendship, Louise held on to the hope that things would return to normal and they could all socialize again. But the situation only deteriorated. Over several months, the bullying became a daily ordeal. It was as if these two teenagers were attending school with the sole purpose of tormenting their former friend. Our young heroine was afraid to retaliate. Despite the constant harassment, she attempted to reason with her abusers verbally. But her efforts proved futile. As is often the case in such scenarios, the lack of consequences only emboldened their behavior. The abusers grew increasingly brazen, even resorting to physical aggression on a few occasions. Still, they were wary of punishment, so they took care to leave no visible traces. Consequently, Louise began to live in fear, dreading even the thought of going to school. During this time, her parents noticed their child's depressed state. They tried to ascertain the cause of her distress, but Louise remained stubbornly silent. She feared that involving adults would only exacerbate the situation, so she clung to the hope of resolving it independently. She wasn't prepared for a physical confrontation, knowing that her two classmates were stronger and would likely overpower her. She attempted to resolve the issue through dialogue, but their conduct became intolerable. At one point, Louise threatened to inform her elders. That day, her friends once again waited for her after school, but this time, they issued serious threats, warning her of severe repercussions if adults learn of their behavior. Our heroine was at a loss. Persuasion had failed, and the threat of involving adults had also proven ineffective. She couldn't physically contend with two girls her own age, yet she could no longer endure the relentless bullying. The following day, she went to school, and the torment began anew. Even before the first class commenced, her friends resumed their teasing, and it persisted throughout the entire day. Ultimately, Louise decided she had to take action. She saw reporting them to her teacher as the only way to escape the bullying. During another break, before her classmates could start their usual harassment, Louise approached her teacher and disclosed the bullying. The teacher was taken aback and subsequently addressed the two friends, engaging them in an educational discussion. Louise hadn't gone into extensive detail, so the teacher simply spoke with the girls, believing this would be sufficient to make them reflect on their actions. Louise, the affected girl, was present during this conversation and confirmed that her friends had been pestering her every recess. It appeared that the two classmates were now apprehensive about potential punishment. After the discussion with the teacher, they left Louise alone and didn't bother her for the remainder of the day. Louise was overjoyed, believing her ordeal was finally over. But in reality, she had unwittingly signed her own death warrant. On Friday, March 10th, 2023, the very girls who had been systematically bullying their friend for months approached her, seemingly with an offer of reconciliation. One of them invited Louise to her house on Saturday to spend the evening together as a gesture of making amends. The plan was for all three girls to gather, share some tea, and watch something together. They even apologized to Louise, claiming they had simply taken their jokes too far. For Louise, this was a moment of immense relief and happiness. Just a day prior, she had been desperate for a way to end the nightmare at school, and now it seemed her friendships were on the mend, just as she had hoped. She readily accepted their proposal, also apologizing for having felt the need to complain to the teacher. Louise confessed that she couldn't bear the bullying any longer, which had forced her to take such an extreme step. The girls responded that they understood. It appeared the tension in their friendship had dissipated. On Saturday, March 11th, they proceeded to spend the evening together as planned. That day, Louise's mother and father observed a noticeable change in their daughter. For the past few months, she had been withdrawn and depressed, often isolating herself in her room and communicating poorly. She had been reluctant to go to school, but now, everything seemed to have reversed. The schoolgirl was finally smiling and appeared to be in good spirits. Naturally, her mother was also delighted and willingly allowed her to visit her friends. The woman was aware of their previous quarrels and was glad to see the girls' friendship seemingly restored. She knew how shy her daughter was and how challenging it was for her to form friendships. So, this development pleased her as much as it did Louise. The friends lived relatively close to one another if one took a direct route through a small wooded area. However, it was also possible to take a longer route via the city roads. Understandably, the latter path seemed safer, and it was the one Louise always used. After lunch, our heroine set off for her friend's house. Upon arriving, she called her mother to let her know she had made it safely. The schoolgirl planned to spend a few hours there and then return home. Her parents had set an 1800 hours, 6 p.m., curfew and asked her not to be late. Louise was a responsible girl and always abided by her family's rules. This time, however, she did not return home by the appointed hour. Her mother grew concerned and tried calling her daughter, but her cell phone went unanswered. More than 15 minutes had passed, yet the girl had not come back. Numerous calls went straight to voicemail, and even messages sent via messenger remained unread by Louise. Her mother's anxiety intensified, prompting her to call the home of the friend where the gathering had taken place. That girl reported that Louise had left her house a considerable time ago, as had the other friend. This had apparently occurred more than half an hour earlier, meaning Louise should have already arrived home. After several more unsuccessful attempts to reach their child, the mother and father began to search for her. They got into the family car and drove multiple times along the route their daughter was supposed to have taken. They checked several shops along the way, but the schoolgirl was nowhere to be found. Everyone they asked claimed not to have seen anyone matching Louise's description. Throughout this entire period, the daughter's cell phone remained silent. Eventually, the mother and father decided to go to the police. They filed a report regarding the teenager's disappearance and provided the police with all necessary information to initiate a search. The police officers treated the report with utmost seriousness, given that it involved a 12-year-old child. Indeed, the town where they resided was quite small, with a population of about 17,000 in a tightly knit local community. Many residents knew one another, so the incident caused considerable alarm among the citizens. Most of them had families and children who now felt potentially endangered. Law enforcement officials reached out to the media to enlist volunteers for the search and rescue operation. However, even without this official call, a large number of people responded, eager to assist Louise's family. Additionally, it was crucial to issue an alert in case there were witnesses possessing valuable information. The search for the girl commenced that evening, but the encroaching darkness limited visibility and hampered the process. Units with K9S, as well as an aerial unit, joined the operation. From early the next morning, volunteers and professional searchers redoubled their efforts, working tirelessly on the case. In the meantime, the police were interviewing the two friends with whom Louise had met the evening before she vanished. The schoolgirls appeared anxious and frightened to the investigators. However, this was not entirely surprising, considering they were discussing a 12 or 13-year-old peer. They were likely worried about their friend, and perhaps for themselves. Their parents were also deeply concerned, as it could have been any of their children. A fear began to spread that a predator targeting children might be active in the vicinity. The first area the volunteers focused on was the immediate vicinity between the friends' homes. Police began scrutinizing the teenager's immediate social circle, hoping to uncover if she might have been acquainted with anyone potentially dangerous. The only piece of information that struck investigators as suspicious was the testimony from teachers at the school all three children attended. According to one teacher, just 2 days before the incident, Louise had complained to him about these same two friends. But at the time, it all seemed rather trivial, and nothing more suspicious could be gleaned from it. On Sunday afternoon, a group of volunteers was combing the wooded area situated between the girls' homes. A path, a shorter route, also ran through it, which Louise could theoretically have used to get home. She had never taken that path before, but it was still a theory worth investigating. And their efforts were not in vain. Approximately 3 kilometers from Louise's house, near an old train station, the girl's body was discovered. The victim had suffered a blow to the head with a blunt object. A plastic bag was covering her head. All of the girl's clothing was saturated with blood. A forensic examination confirmed the identity of the body. The deceased was indeed the missing Louise. It was glaringly obvious that the schoolgirl had not died of natural causes. The medical examiner identified more than 30 stab wounds on her body. These were relatively shallow stab wounds, distributed across almost all parts of the victim's body. Several major blood vessels had been severed. According to the medical examiner's report, the cause of the schoolgirl's death was exsanguination, blood loss. After sustaining the injuries, she rapidly lost consciousness and, within a few minutes, succumbed without ever making it home. No drag marks were found around the body, nor were there any signs of sexual assault. It appeared to be a senseless, brutal attack, as if the schoolgirl had simply been accosted with a knife, stabbed dozens of times, and then left in the woods. Police found indications of a struggle, but no definitive physical evidence was immediately recovered. Most critically, the murder weapon was missing, which significantly complicated the task of finding the perpetrator. The authorities began to suspect they were dealing with a psychopath who harbored a profound rage towards the girl. The nature and number of the wounds suggested the killer was in a state of extreme agitation, striking repeatedly until Louise showed no further signs of life. There was also speculation that this rage might not have been random. It could have been fueled by personal motives. Detectives started to look more intently at the young victim's immediate circle. By nature, she was modest and quiet, never associating with troublesome individuals or dangerous company. She had no known addictions. Louise also had no documented mental health issues. She wasn't suffering from any illnesses, nor was she known to run away from home. There was no indication she had ever entertained thoughts of self-harm. Indeed, There were no identifiably dangerous people in the girl's immediate environment. She came from a well-regarded, respectable family. Her parents also had no history of legal troubles or problematic associations. Investigators decided to speak once more with her friends, who were 12 and 13 years old at the time. They hoped the girls might have noticed something suspicious or perhaps seen someone watching Louise. But the children claimed to have seen nothing and no one. This interaction, however, was not entirely fruitless. After the police met with the teenagers, their anxiety seemed to escalate with each passing moment. Eventually, one of the girls could no longer bear the questioning and, in a burst of emotion, exclaimed that they were the ones who had stabbed Louise. She then covered her face with her hands and began to cry. The admission was so staggering that even the seasoned detectives initially thought the words were some kind of terrible joke. But the girl insisted it was true. She sobbed uncontrollably and apologized to her parents. In a typical scenario, police officers would have immediately detained an individual confessing to inflicting 30 stab wounds. However, this situation involved children aged 12 and 13 who had taken a weapon into their hands and, under the laws of the country, could not be prosecuted criminally. The parents of all the schoolgirls, as well as the local community, were utterly devastated by this news. After further discussions with the teenagers, conducted in the presence of their parents and legal counsel, the confession of the first girl was corroborated. Her friend also admitted her involvement. Both juvenile offenders described in detail what had transpired. According to the girls, they had indeed been tormenting their former friend for several months due to petty disagreements that had arisen previously. The schoolgirls became enraged when Louise reported their behavior to the teacher. They had believed they could act with impunity. But after Louise's complaint, they feared their parents would be summoned to the school. So, on that very same day, they resolved to exact revenge on the girl and eliminate her, ensuring Louise could not complain to anyone else. The older girl at school decided to invite Louise over under the pretext of reconciliation. This way, they could earn her trust and lure her away from adult protection. Their intention was to settle the score once and for all. As their argument, the older friend brought a kitchen knife. When a victim took the bait and came to visit, the girls initially lulled their gullible peer into a false sense of security. They shared tea and watched a couple of videos on the internet. Everything appeared to be proceeding amicably. When their guest began to prepare to leave for home, the older classmates suggested they walk together and accompany her home, but proposed taking the route through the forest. According to her, it was a shorter way to Louise's house. The three of them, she implied, had nothing to fear and could continue their conversation. Louise, unsuspecting, agreed. At that moment, she was last seen alive by the parents of the schoolgirl whom Louise had come to visit. According to these adults, this occurred around 5:30 p.m. The girls left the house together and moved some distance away to avoid any accidental witnesses. After that, the friends confronted the heroine of our story, accusing her of betrayal. Quite rapidly, all three began to quarrel. The offended teenagers lost their tempers. Then, the younger girl grabbed the victim, placed a plastic bag over her head, and struck her with a stone. That wound, however, did not prove fatal to the schoolgirl. She began to fight back. But the older girl did not stand idly by. She attacked Louise and began stabbing her repeatedly. After the assault, the teenagers abandoned their peer. According to their account, she was still alive when they left her, but likely not for long. The girl had lost consciousness and was rapidly losing blood. There was no one around to help her, so she soon passed away. Investigators initially found it hard to believe that the attack, with its extreme violence, could have been carried out solely by children. The girls came from ordinary families and had no prior history with the law. Therefore, it seemed almost inconceivable that they could have committed such a brutal murder. Initially, it was hypothesized that a third, older teenager might have been present in their company, someone who would have wielded the knife. But the juvenile offenders insisted, time and again, that no one else was with them. They were the ones who had killed their ex-girlfriend. A knife needed to be found to match fingerprints and DNA on the murder weapon. The girls admitted they had discarded the weapon nearby in the woods, but couldn't recall the exact location. They had managed to walk with their victim to the old railroad station, where the body was later discovered. The kitchen knife was purportedly dumped near this location. Search teams scoured the entire area, but the police were unable to locate this crucial piece of evidence. According to the killers, it was a large knife suitable for cutting meat. It should have been the primary piece of evidence in the case, as it could have definitively identified who was holding it at the time of the murder. The police still harbored suspicions that the girls might be lying and hoped to identify a third party who would have left DNA samples or fingerprints on the handle. Despite this, the teenagers continued to maintain that they were the sole perpetrators of the killing. The resolution of this uncertainty fell to the criminalists and the forensic expert. The forensic examination confirmed 30 stab wounds to Louise's stomach, back, chest, and neck. Additionally, the victim's hands were severely cut, indicative of active defensive actions. The schoolgirl resisted as long as she was able, then collapsed to the ground from blood loss, after which her classmates inflicted several more stab wounds. During the examination, DNA samples found on the body and on the bag belonged only to the 3 individuals at the scene of the crime, traces of the victim herself, and those of the 2 confessed schoolgirls. In the end, the police accepted the girls' testimonies as truthful. No evidence could be found to suggest the presence of anyone else. Under German law, criminal liability is only imposed from the age of 14. For this reason, neither of the participants in the killing could be arrested or punished in the criminal justice system. However, the collected evidence was passed on to the Youth Welfare Office, which was then tasked with dealing with the juvenile killers. The school attended by the teenagers reopened on Monday. Child psychologists were present on site to ensure that the frightened students could receive necessary help and support. The work of these psychologists within the educational institution continued for 3 days. During this period, regular classes took a back seat. Specialists communicated with some of the shocked pupils individually. Group meetings were also held in classrooms. Psychologists assisted teachers in fostering understanding and appropriate responses from the children. Even after these initial 3 days, the psychologists continued to meet with students. Classes eventually resumed, following the regular program without alteration. As a sign of mourning, national flags were lowered throughout the city. On March 22nd, the 12-year-old victim of this brutal attack was laid to rest in a private funeral in accordance with her parents' wishes. At the location where the body was discovered, an impromptu memorial was established, drawing many residents of the city to pay their respects. Surprisingly, as it later emerged, the perpetrators did not exhibit significant remorse for their actions. Although they cried at the police station, they quickly composed themselves and showed no lasting regret for what they had done. The girls had committed a cold-blooded, premeditated murder, and yet, the very next day, they were reportedly posting videos on their TikTok accounts. Their accounts were subsequently deleted due to numerous complaints. They interacted with their peers quite calmly, as if the murder was a normal occurrence for them. It is known that they were temporarily removed from their families and transferred to the care of the youth department. Here, psychologists and psychiatrists worked with the teenagers. Furthermore, it was necessary to determine if the children had any underlying mental abnormalities that might have contributed to the tragic outcome. They might have required specialized treatment. According to the laws of the country, they will indeed bear no criminal responsibility for their actions. The prosecutor's office halted the investigation and closed the case, having established that the children had, in fact, killed their classmate themselves. There was no basis to suspect a third party's involvement in the killing. The senior prosecutor stated at a press conference that the perpetrators themselves needed protection because they were still children and that emotion had played a key role in the incident. The devastated parents of the murdered girl were beside themselves with grief and utterly dismayed by this decision. They could not comprehend how such a brutal murder of their daughter could go unpunished, with the juvenile perpetrators effectively escaping legal retribution. Thanks to their outrage and activism, this shocking case of child-on-child cruelty became a major public issue. All of this ignited a nationwide discussion about the perceived imperfections of the German legal system, which not only allows such cases to occur, but also proves largely powerless to punish the criminals when they are below the age of criminal responsibility. Public discontent was widespread, so after some time, the families of the teenage killers were compelled to leave the city. The parents of the girls faced constant harassment from the local community, which was outraged by the situation and fearful of living near child killers and their families. Neighbors began to openly threaten the parents of these troubled teenagers, so for safety reasons, the murderers' families relocated from their homes. However, their children remain in a state institution, and their parents are still in contact with them. In effect, the parents of the killers turned out to be the individuals most severely impacted by the atrocities committed by their own children. The girls have already been removed from their care for some time, and there's a possibility they may not be returned to their families at all. It is presumed they might end up in a boarding school for minors or be placed with foster parents. For a long time, specific details on this matter have been scarce, as Germany has very strict legislation protecting the privacy of even the most violent criminals and their loved ones, let alone children. This is particularly true when it comes to complex cases such as murders committed by junior high school students. For this same reason of strict confidentiality, their real names and photographs have not been publicly disclosed. Psychologists and psychiatrists have worked extensively with the perpetrators, and the teenagers have not been found to have any diagnosable mental disabilities. This finding caused even greater shock regarding the brutality of the attack. It was an insidious, calculated crime. The children proceeded with the killing in cold blood and with clear intent, armed themselves with a knife, lured Louise into a trap, and then brutally murdered her. All of this was done solely for revenge, a motive the schoolgirls confirmed during their conversations with the police. Many experts began to search for those to blame for this tragedy, which is why a torrent of negativity and hatred was directed at the parents of the girls. Due to current German law, the perpetrators could simply change their names and now potentially live in a place where no one is aware of their connection to the brutally cruel act, nor would anyone even suspect they could be dangerous. The incident has sparked a significant wave of protests and discussions across the country as a whole. According to a number of experts, the incidence of crimes, including particularly serious offenses involving minors, is increasing annually in Germany. Many other cases have come to light, such as the situation with the teenager from Wunstorf. In that instance, both individuals involved were 14 years old and classmates. This situation also involved years of bullying experienced by one of the juveniles. Ultimately, one of the boys beat the other to death with a blunt object. In the summer of 2022, another shocking case occurred where 13 and 14-year-old female classmates strangled their friend. In reality, serious crimes are committed by children of even younger ages. The number of such cases involving minors in Germany alone runs into the dozens each year. All of this is a cause for great concern throughout the country, particularly because these cases often seem to be the most shocking and incomprehensible. These episodes are profoundly traumatic for the families and friends of both the victims and the perpetrators, who embark on a path of crime before even graduating from high school. The storm of public indignation has not subsided to this day. An initiative group created a petition demanding changes to the legislation to lower the age of criminal responsibility. Over 40,000 people signed it within the first few days. Some experts suggest that violence depicted on television and in computer games is to blame, potentially acting as a trigger. Statistical experts have analyzed a vast number of games and television programs featuring violent scenes, concluding that such content can instill violent behavioral models that encourage young people to resolve problems through force. And given their still developing psyches, the situation is exacerbated. Some experts believe that control over such issues should rest entirely with the state, and the process of a child's upbringing should be more closely monitored. There is also a more radical viewpoint, suggesting that municipal systems should be primarily responsible for raising children, as parents cannot always ensure the comprehensive development of an individual. In the opinion of many local residents, The parents of the killers bear guilt for this tragedy, alleging they raised them improperly. Perhaps they exhibited complete indifference to their children's lives or subjected them to cruel treatment. All these factors, it is speculated, could have contributed to the children deciding to execute their ex-girlfriend as what they perceived to be a viable solution. It is not possible to ascertain definitively what the environment in which these schoolgirls were raised was truly like.